I have a very exciting game to show you. A game between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Magnus Carlsen. And it's all about the battle of the initiative. I think you will definitely like it, learn something. And if you would like to learn more, make sure to subscribe to the channel as well. Because I like to cover these kind of games, which is heart against heart. It's a battle with the strongest pieces on the board, the major pieces. And well, let's see what happens in this game. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave plays with the white pieces, goes for one e4, and we have a Sicilian. Knight f3, e6, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6. This is what we call the Sicilian for knights, and this is potentially really sharp because after knight takes c6, black recaptures with its b pawn, capturing towards the center. Now we see that these pawns, they are nicely placed in the center. If black gets a chance, he will go for the move d5, but it's white's turn, and white plays e5, attacking the knight, so the knight comes to d5, and now white is not interested in trading off the knights because the double pawn is not a problem for black at all. But you go knight e4, and we have a very sharp battle because the pawn on e5 restricts the movement of black's d pawn, so that's not looking very nice. This is a very trendy variation with a lot of ideas for black. You may play something like queen c7, for instance. There are other options as well. Bishop b7 is the reliable, solid, more solid continuation, but still it's potentially very sharp. And here MVL goes for very interesting move knight d6, but there's no need to play this move yet. There are various other useful developing moves which can be considered here, but knight d6 is a popular idea. Bishop takes, because you need to get rid of that knight. E takes d6, and the question is this pawn weak? I mean, can black start attacking it, or is it really annoying for black, for instance, towards the end of the game? Let's have a look. c5 played with the idea to open up the diagonal for this bishop. White goes c4, attacking the knight. Knight has a choice. Can go to f6, for instance. Looks like it's a safe square, but Magnus put a knight on b4 so that after the knight gets kicked one more time, it goes back to c6, and it's looking for the d4 square. So that explains bishop e3, attacking the pawn. Now the queen comes out to f6, attacking the pawn on b2. Queen d2, protecting the pawn on b2. And here, interesting moment, as just 2 weeks earlier, game between Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen, Norwegian's world's #1, played in that game the move knight d4. But okay, if you play that move, it could very well be that this pawn on d4 just becomes more loose. So instead, here Magnus deviates from that game by playing the move rook b8. And that's also a pawn sacrifice, but black is announcing its plans by putting the rook on the b file. He wants to attack that pawn. So bishop takes c5, and here it's the novelty. There were 2 earlier games of Ray Robson in this line. He faced both the moves queen e5 check and the move bishop a6. Magnus played here the move bishop a8. He wants to keep the bishop on this diagonal. It's a nice spot for this bishop, of course. And at the same time, keep an eye on that pawn on b2. And, well, one problem for white is that he cannot just protect it with rook b1 as it runs into queen f5. With a double attack, black is winning big material. So white instead played here the move bishop b4 to close the b file. Now after queen e5 check, the bishop comes to e2. And the question is, what is black exactly going to do now? If you play something like knight d4, well, then the bishop comes into c3, and you're kind of forcing the exchange of pieces on e2. And in such an endgame, white is a piece up. I mean, you can take on g2 with the bishop, but then it's rook takes, rook to g1, after which the pawn on g7 will be hanging as well. So Magnus want to win the pawn back without allowing any counterplay, but after knight takes b4, a takes b4, he takes on g2. He's attacking the rook on h1, and you would just expect here white to play the move rook g1, but it was not played in the game. That's very remarkable. But I want to show you one line. If you play this move rook g1, attacking the bishop goes away, then rook g5 is actually quite strong. You're attacking the queen, and for instance, if you now go for this exchange of pieces, this endgame is probably still a bit problematic for black because of that pawn on d6. The king is not comfortable, and white also has ideas to advance on the queen side. So that's a tricky endgame which should probably be avoided, and therefore the position is quite risky. But MVL had a different idea in mind. Play the move rook a5 immediately. Want to attack, counterattack the queen on e5. And you may think, wait a second, I can get 2 rooks for the queen if you sacrifice your queen, take on a5, bishop takes h1. But black's pieces are not well coordinated. If you play f3, the bishop is kind of stuck, and even with ideas like queen g5, white is about to generate some threats against the black king. So therefore, no queen takes a5, but queen e4 on the board, hitting the rook still with the bishop. So rook goes to g1, bishop to f3, and it seems as if pieces are going to be swapped on e2. Rook takes g7 was played, just capturing the pawn. Now after bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, you have this option to go for the exchange of queens, but a much better continuation is to keep queens on the board, because after queen b1, this king is a bit in trouble. Queen back to d1, once again offering the exchange of queens. And here black captured the pawn on b2 and hits the rook on g7 as well, threatens queen takes b4. So white really needs to consolidate its position in a clever way, and he does so with this move, rook a2 g5. Excellent move. Rooks are safe, there are no double attacks, and if white were to play here, rook g8 would come, and then we see this pawn on d6 is a monster. It prevents the king from coming to e7. So rook g8 is a mating threat. But first, black's turn. Queen takes b4 with check. King goes away. And now it's queen takes c4 with check, but the king walks over to g1. This must have been calculated by both players from afar. And, well, we see rook g8 is still a serious threat, but the rook goes to f8. So rook g8 will not come with check this time. And, well, the big question is, what does white have now? I mean, white is 2 pawns down, but it's a sharp position. But with the following move, it's white who shows that he can still fight for the initiative here. And rook takes f7 may just have been overlooked by Magnus Carlsen. This is a brilliant rook sacrifice, which black can absolutely not accept. Because if you take the rook, it's rook g8 check. Rook got to drop back to f8. Queen h5 check. King got to go to d8, and it's rook takes f8 with checkmate. That's it. So you can't take the rook with your rook, but how about king takes rook? Well, then the queen will come in with check to h5 anyway. King has to go to f6, only move, and now queen h6. King goes back. Now you take the pawn on h7. If the king goes back to e8, now once again this pawn on d6 is a very important attacking weapon. This time it supports the queen to deliver checkmate on e7. Beautiful line. If the king goes to f6 instead, well, then it's queen to g7 with checkmate. Nice cooperation of queen and rook. So back to this position. White just captured that pawn on f7. We have seen that the rook cannot be taken. What should black do here? Queen e4. Fantastic idea. Trying to consolidate its position. And one of the ideas is to prepare this move, rook to b1, with an skewer on the back rank. So white is for a choice and played here this move, rook to g7, and that's a very nice idea, because the rooks are about to make some damage on this rank. So black decided to take the rook on f7. Of course, we have to understand what actually happens in case of rook to b1, but then there will follow rook e7, king d8, rook takes d7. If king goes back, checkmate on e7. If the king goes to c8, well, then we go rook c7. And if the king goes back to d8, well, we have something like rook c1 and everything is under control. So that's one of the ideas, that you can always come back with your rook to c1. So here we understand that black needs to do something about these two rooks. Therefore, the rook was captured on f7. Now it's a rook check on g8. Rook f8 is only move. Queen goes to h5 with check. If the king tries to escape, it's checkmate on f8 once again. Therefore, queen g6 is the only move. You got to give back the queen. Now rook takes, h takes, queen takes. We still have a very sharp position with the queen and two rooks. But the king is a bit of a problem with his pawn on d6. There are always mating ideas. But what should black do? Well, in the game, Magnus went for king d8. He wanted to go away. However, rook f7 is also an interesting move here, but it does allow a repetition of moves. And maybe that's something Magnus just didn't want, although objectively speaking, there's nothing wrong with it. Looking at this particular position with rook on f7, maybe he also didn't like that white can just advance the h-pawn because of that pin. The rook looks a bit clumsy, but after king f8, black is about to entangle and place the rook on g7. Black is in okay shape. Anyway, didn't happen. There followed the move king d8. And now white decided to give a check on g5. I should also point out that queen g7, hitting the rook, intending queen e7 ideas, or even just to come back with the queen around. Let's say if you go rook e8, the queen comes to c3, threatening checkmate. So the rook is poorly placed, but it couldn't do much else. If you go away with the rook with check, it's king f1. Now rook b6. This kind of endgame, when white is about to win the pawn on d7, looks quite unpleasant for black also. Anyway, didn't happen. Queen g5 was played. Understandable that you're looking for forcing moves. King e8 runs into queen e7 with checkmate. Therefore, king c8 on the board. Now another check on c5. You can't go to d8 because of queen c7 and white wins the rook. King b7, queen check on b5, king c8, queen c4. King goes to b7 again. Now it's queen c7 with check. King a6, queen takes d7. That's an important pawn, but the question is white really able to promote it? Rook fd8 played, queen takes e6, you're giving up that pawn, but these pawns, they are separated, so they cannot support each other when they are going to be advanced. King b6 is a reasonable move, so that you're trying to come closer with your king and wrap up the pawn. Queen e7, with ideas of giving a check. a5, queen c7, king b5, king f1. The king is coming over. But now the a-pawn is also pretty fast, so it's a really sharp endgame. Of course, there are always a bunch of checks with the queen, but is it enough to win the game? That's another question. King e2, a3, king d3, rook goes behind to support the a-pawn. King comes to d4, so that after a2 you can give a check with the queen on b7, forcing the king to go to the side of the board. And look now, the queen goes back to b2. The queen attacks the pawn on a2 and controls the promotion square. And here, Magnus thought, okay, I can just capture the pawn with check. Cannot be anything wrong with it, right? King c5, oops. It's a attack on the rook. If the rook goes away, it's checkmate on b4. Is this something Magnus had missed here? I'm just not sure. He played the move rook b6, hoping for some tricks. If you take it, it's rook b8 and the queen on b2 is gone. If you take with the queen instead, well, then there's still a mating threat on b4, obviously. But there's rook c8, check. If the king goes away, don't promote your pawn because of queen check on the a file and you lose the queen. But if you go rook c1, I don't think there's anything better than just a bunch of checks. But let's go back, rook b6. We don't have to take the rook. Look, queen takes a2 is just checkmate. This is what Magnus had overlooked. And therefore, the match was tight and it was leading to an Armageddon game after this. So Remarkable end of this game. Magnus just horribly blundered with his move rook takes d6. What should he have done instead? Just make sure that the king is not caught at the side of the board. He could have given up the a pawn right away. This is always difficult. You don't want to spend the tempo on giving up your main asset. But here, it's very important to free your king, enable the king to come back to the middle of the board. You're attacking the queen. If the queen gives one more check, the king comes to c6. You'll wrap up the pawn on d6 very soon, because after king e5, you can just play rook a5, and on the next move, you take on d6. And this endgame with queen and 2 pawns versus 2 rooks, it should end in a draw. Of course, the game can continue for a long time, but this is, with optimal play, how the game should have ended. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Click the subscribe button, like this video, share it among your friends, and very soon, much more exciting games, how major pieces can totally destroy your opponent's king.